Chengli and the Silk Road Caravan by Hildy Kang, Chapter 11. Chengli's heart pounded in his ears, and each of his bones jammed against its neighbor. Paralyzed with fear, he hung on, with one phrase bouncing over and over in his head. "Help me, Father! Help me, Father! Help me, Father!" His face tight against the horse's neck, he slipped and slid across the horse's broad back, but kept his balance. "Go faster!" yelled Chengli, and the horse strained to obey. The frantic galloping settled into its own rhythm, and Chengli stared ahead at the dust cloud that marked the wake of the princess and her captor. He watched it reach the line where the flat desert floor joined with the mountains. His horse began to close the gap that kept him from Mei Ling. Then suddenly the flat, predictable desert became steep, unfamiliar land, and the horse slowed its pace. "Hurry," urged Chengli, but the horse slowed to pick its way between boulders and over loose stones, its hooves clacking as it struggled to find footing. Soon the forest loomed ahead, and Chengli dodged one way and the other to escape low-hanging branches. Rounding a corner, he nearly crashed into a torrent of water, blocking their way, cascading wildly over rocks and fallen trees. "Go!" shouted Chengli. The horse stepped into the roiling water, slipped on the wet stones, and reared up in terror. Chengli screamed and slid from the horse's back into the water, twisting away from the thrashing hooves. "Aye!" he sputtered as the freezing water cut through his thin tunic, and his foot jammed between two water-slick rocks. "Oh no!" He watched a pool of dark red spread from his leg into the water. With an effort, he shoved at the heavy rocks and freed his trapped foot. He gritted his teeth and hoisted himself out of the creek. A jagged cut pulled the skin away from the front of his leg, and blood poured down over his foot. Yanking off his tunic, he hurriedly wrapped it around his leg to make a bandage. Shivering so hard he could barely move, he inched toward a spot where sunlight broke through the trees, and he sat, holding the tunic in place. Gradually the blood stopped oozing. In the warmth of the sun, his shivering slowed. He looked up. The horse! Where was the horse? He looked up the mountain. He looked down the way he had come. As far as he could see, there was no horse, only trees, stones, and the sound of thundering water. However was he going to find Mei Ling without a horse to ride? He hugged his injured leg and sat in a trance as the sunlight shifted out of sight behind the trees. Warmth drained away and shadows deepened. In his misery, the shadows of the tall spruce trees played tricks on his mind, and the branches curved out and up, not at trees at all, but the wide tiled eaves of the Chang'an city gate curving up to the heavens. Now what, he asked himself. I have to get through the night, he thought. He was so useless. He'd lost the princess, lost the horse, and ripped open his leg. He was cold and wet and hungry, and there was not a thing he could do about it. Plus his leg hurt worse every minute. He pulled himself into a tight ball and tried to stay warm. "I am too old to cry," he yelled out loud. The sound of his own voice helped him feel less alone, and he rubbed his fists across his eyes. To avoid freezing in the autumn night, he had to find a way to keep warm. He pulled himself toward some boulders clumped together and wondered how cold stone could provide shelter from the wind. Some fallen branches thick with rough spruce needles helped, but the cones poked at his sore body. He pulled them off. "Now," he mumbled, "I've just got to wait for morning." Exhausted, he slept. Sunlight warmed his body. He rolled over, opened his eyes, and cringed. A dagger glinted in the sunlight, its tip right under his nose. He slammed his eyes shut, then slowly opened them again. The dagger still quivered near his throat. He kept his head motionless and looked at the drawn dagger, then to the hand that held it, and slowly up to the face. Fierce eyes glinted at him above a huge bulbous nose with tufts of ugly nose hair poking out. Chengli decided he did not like that face. He glanced sideways. Two other men, with muscles bulging like wrestlers, knelt there, daggers ready. Their eyes glared wildly, and hair stuck out all over their heads. Brushes of hair hid their upper lips, and more hair like mops covered their chins. No man from Middle Kingdom would hide his face like this. Who were these strangers? Please, Chengli thought he'd better say something, and it had better be polite, just in case they spoke his language. He had heard of the many nomad groups that lived in these mountains, all speaking different languages. "Please, I'm just a lost boy," his voice squeaked. He tried again. "I'm not dangerous. Truly you don't need your daggers." He watched, but the daggers didn't move. The men talked loudly among themselves in a language Chengli didn't recognize. their voices gruff and sharp. They got up and searched behind the trees, and Chengli waited. When they seemed to agree that he was alone and helpless, they sheathed their daggers. One man, taller than the others, reached over and yanked up Chengli from his bed of spruce needles. Chengli screamed in pain and grabbed at his leg. The man noticed the makeshift bandage around the wounded leg and yanked it off. The wound had dried tight against the cloth, and now the bleeding began again. The man shoved the tunic back in place and pulled the sleeves forward to tie it snugly against Chengli's leg. A sharp whistle from one of the men brought 3 horses out of the forest. The leader picked up Chengli as if he weighed nothing at all and set him on a horse, mounting behind him. The group set off up the mountain, the men talking and laughing as they rode along. Chengli kept watching these wild warriors. What will they do with me, he wondered as he bounced along. Where are we going? He knew he should be frightened, but he wasn't. Anything was better than sitting cold, hungry, and completely alone with a leg that screamed for attention. The throbbing in his leg kept rhythm with the horse's stride. Up they went, through a break in the mountain wall, down a gorge, and out onto a high mountain meadow. A settlement of a dozen nomad yurts, round tents covered with layers of pounded sheep's wool, came into view. His captors rode up to the front of one yurt, and the leader grinned happily and burst into song. A song, thought Chengli? I'm miserable, and he sings about it? The song apparently announced their arrival, for someone pulled back the cloth flap that served as a door. Out came what appeared to be the mother, father, and then grandfather, and a young boy who also had wild, bushy hair. They circled around Chengli, pointing, laughing, and poking at Chengli's bare skin, as if he were some strange unknown animal purchased down at the desert bazaar. Friend or foe, wondered Chengli through the haze of his pain. Cruel or just curious? Bandits or shepherds? The mother noticed Chengli's leg. Her tone changed, and without understanding her words, Chengli sensed she would take care of him. He moved to get down off the horse. The world swayed and blurred, then all went black. He awoke inside the yurt, dressed in a clean, warm tunic and covered by a soft woolen blanket. His leg felt strange. It stung, but no longer throbbed. He sat up and looked around. First he checked his leg and found it wrapped in a soft, clean cloth. He poked beneath the cloth and discovered slices of fresh onion bound snugly against the cut. So that's what makes it sting. Now he knew one thing. The mother was friendly. She had given him clothes, a bed, and even taken care of his leg, doing it all while he slept. Encouraged by the care he'd been given, he pulled off the blanket and swung his legs off the sleeping mat. A searing pain shot up his wounded leg. He gasped and slowly eased himself back down under the blanket. Staying totally motionless, the pain gradually subsided. I won't try that again for a while, thought Chengli. He looked around the tent. Thick carpets of red and yellow covered the floor and much of the walls. Bright embroidered cushions served as chairs. Orange and yellow ribbons draped and crisscrossed behind the wooden spokes that held up the tent. After months on the desert, the bright colors made Chengli blink. A small fire burned in the stone circle at the center of the tent. Thin threads of white smoke circled the room and made their way out through the smoke hole in the roof. On the fire, a simmering pot sent out a new and inviting smell. It seemed like a long, long time since he'd had anything to eat. Voices outside warned Chengli that the family had returned. One by one, they came in through the flap that served as a door, looked at him, and then sat around the fire. Each one said something to Chengli, and he tried to look friendly in return. The son, the one with the wild bushy hair, looked straight at Chengli, his smile twisting into a smirk. So, he said, you fell off horse. Chengli felt the smile leave his face and his eyes widened in surprise. He nodded. Surprised I speak your language? Asked the boy. I Aga. I go down to the bazaar. I learn. Chengli watched and waited. Aga leaned over Chengli's mat. Only babies fall off horses. Don't know how to ride? He taunted. Chengli's surprise edged close to anger. The family around the fire called Aga to join them, and Chengli relaxed. Bowls of hot stew were passed to each person, and one was handed to Chengli. Before he could begin eating, the mother spoke. Aga turned back to Chengli. Mother asks why you are here. Boy from Middle Kingdom in high mountain Kazaa grazing land. It never happened before. People from Middle Kingdom not visit nomad families. It's a long story, Chengli said. Most important, I am alone and I am not dangerous. I tried something, he sighed and looked around the room, and I failed. I lost my caravan, I lost my princess, and I lost my horse. I have no idea what to do next.